Hi there. The workshop, the UDO workshop on behalf of the board and the planning board will begin shortly.
like to call to order our Board of Aldermen and Planning Board UDO Joint Workshop, August 10th, 2020. We'll have our invocation. I would like to begin it with a moment of silence for the passing of former First Lady of Southport, Mrs. Becky Howard, former Mayor Robert Howard's wife. And after our moment of silence, we'll have Madam Alderman Lowe Davis with our invocation, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. All those who would like to join, please stand.
Amen. Let us pray. Almighty God, we thank you for the blessing of Southport, of the blessing of being able to live here, and of the blessing of being able to serve you today as we try to find ways to best protect and preserve your wonderful creation. Amen. Of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Lo. So this is our continuation. We'll have the approval of the agenda. I'll entertain a motion for the approval. Mr. Lombardi, a second. Mayor Pro Tem Mosteller, all in favor? Aye. Okay, motion carried. Thank you. Again, I want to introduce Mr. Wes McLeod. He's a local government services director who's been helping us through this process for the almost 2 years now, and also our city planner, Mr. Thomas Lloyd. I will turn it over to you to get us started. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and board. Thank you all for being here. I'm sure you're fairly exhausted. I guess we're not quite a week ago had quite a trying time. Actually, a fair amount of folks throughout our region had quite a trying time. With that said, let's jump in here. Before we start where we were, which I have the last note on page 3-94 for lighting. Is there any questions, comments, or concerns before we get started?
I just wanted to revisit a couple of things. Page 3-31. What I'd like to suggest, since this generalizes to residential and basically HOA docks, residential docks, to add language that says within the open space district, a residential community dock attached to a homeowners/property owners association common area is permitted only within the community. So we don't have remote, as an example would be like how St. James has a beach community at Oak Island kind of thing. We don't have that happening. And then adding a second sentence, which is a residential POA, HOA POA, community dock is not allowed in open space district as a remote recreation facility for non-contiguous HOA/POA common area. So just add that to that. As long as Wes is good with that.
Yes, that seems fine to me. Is there any objection from the board? Okay.
You want to go ahead?
Wes, I do have one question. Since this is under the heading of accessory use standards, why is the last sentence of the section that the last sentence in the section that the Mayor Pro Tem was just reading from and talking about, it says docks may be utilized as a principal or accessory structure where permitted. But if this section is only about accessory structures, why does it say principal? Do we know?
And Kim,
That's a great question, and it was one that that I sort of struggled with. We wanted to make it clear that wherever you found this particular provision, that they can be, you can have a dock, for example, without having a house on it. I know that it is outside of the organizational structure of the ordinance, so it's more or less a footnote within that accessory use standard, but this just helps, hopefully, to clarify any confusion that may result. My understanding is that it is quite fine for there to be a dock on a vacant lot. That's how it's been, permitted in the past.
I don't think you have an accessory without a primary. I think that to me logically, so, I would think that we would remove that if you feel like that we need a reference of a dock as a principal use, like in business or something like that, then I would think that would be a separate something.
We did have them in both places in the table. Some time ago, there was a question about taking it out of the portion of the standard non-commercial areas, and then just leaving it there. So we can put it back in instead of being two places. It was previously, but I don't know if Thomas, you had a comment on that.
I think it's fine to put it back in if that's the pleasure of the board.
But we would just be eliminating that statement. You don't need it there because it's under accessory uses.
Would it make sense also, this is my thinking on this, to limit these to POAs and HOAs and that the dock is attached to common property of the POA, not each individual within a POA have a dock? Do you follow my explanation there? Is that the intent here? I hope it is.
My understanding is that which you're likely gonna, these days, a new subdivision is gonna have a POA, almost inevitably. But my understanding is that you're going to you could allow a common dock, and then also adjacent to that, if there's a residential property that has a house and they have some adjacency to a body of water, then they could also have a dock. So you can have both.
Is that what the board wants, that individual homeowners can have a dock as well as the POA?
One of the things, Lo, that this was my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, Thomas or Wes, my understanding is that we have many homes that have existing docks, and this is to make them, they wouldn't be non-conforming. So it wasn't the intent of it to allow, because POAs may not all have a community dock. But if they're bordering water, then this was because there's already several homes like in Indigo, thank you. Several homes in Indigo that have individual docks, and that was the point of this.
Well, but this, if we changed it, this would not affect those that already had them. I mean, they would have an existing, non-conforming use that was okay under the previous ordinance. So they wouldn't have to take up their docks. It's just none could be added. Is that not correct?
A little bit more complicated when you get into whether those docks get damaged or not. Am I correct there, Wes? Isn't
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's a policy decision by you guys, you know, whether or not, I mean, that's, you know, that's also going to be a precarious enforcement matter, I would suspect, for the city as well.
It's by, if it makes you, if you can find any sort of checks and balances, it's a special use permit. So, you know, not only does CAMA have to approve it, but then if somebody had a conflict, like an adjacent neighbor, for example, they could, you know, have some kind of input about it. So,
I feel strongly people should have the ability to build a dock if they have a waterfront parcel.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear what you said.
I feel strongly that people should have the ability to build a dock if they have a waterfront parcel. I don't think we need to be restricting people from doing that. I never envisioned that we'd do that.
Yeah, I don't think the planning board would intend for us to eliminate residential docks. I mean, if they did, then it would have been presented that way. That language would have been different. If we change it now, we don't have the consensus of the planning board, you know, behind that. And also, we would hamper existing docks that get damaged, whether it's in Indigo or here on this waterfront here. It would hinder their ability to rebuild with the new UDO if we change that language. And I don't want to create harm on an existing, you know, homeowner where they've invested that money in that property and everything.
Well, if there's a mechanism through which people could rebuild their lots legally, well, I'm just thinking if we limit the number of additional lots going out into open space, we are doing a better job of protecting the environment. This is not to take away any docks that currently exist.
How do docks impact? I don't see the negative impact on the environment of a dock.
Well, they have to get constructed into an open area, right? If they will, even a floating dock has piers and ways of staying, you know, I don't know what the right term is, pilings. So they go into the marsh area. It has an effect on marine life.
By that token, then we ought to not allow people to build houses. By that token, we ought to prohibit people from building houses. It would seem to me. I mean.
I think that's a stretch, but I see that I'm the only one that thinks this way. So
well, and
probably should move on.
CAMA has to approve any dock that goes in the water. So all of marine fisheries, all those people are part of that conversation. So if you, it's not just the city giving them a permit to build a dock.
I understand that.
Wes and Thomas, to go back to the principal and accessory use concept for a second. Even if you had a vacant residential lot and you built a dock on it, does the dock necessarily become the principal use or principal structure? Wouldn't the principal use of the lot is still to construct a house on, whether the house exists or not, doesn't it?
If it got down to brass tacks, it would be the principal use, but because of that inherent, you know, interpretation that is sort of, you know, typically going to be an accessory, that is part of the reason it's only included in the accessory with the note that it may be a principal or an accessory, because there's going to be rare instances where it actually is the principal use. And so, and the other component of this is, remember, your use table is separated by accessory residential and non-residential uses. So it's quite fine to put it in that non-residential use area of your table, but you're clearly specifying that it needs to be for residential nature. So this is a unique situation. We don't have any other instance in here in the ordinance where we're organizationally mismatching ourselves similarly to this. And so, certainly you can put it back in the other one. I think it's probably okay to be there as is, and not put it in the table twice.
Is y'all's recommendation to leave that last sentence in? As a
Thomas is going to have to be the administrator on this. It's sort of, I don't know. It's.
I mean, I'm fine either way, just as long as it's clear that it can be both.
What's the potential harm if we leave it the way it is? Because right now we do have a couple locations that docks are their principal use. I mean, they're in the business district, but that's yoga dock right now is just the yoga dock. The boat tour, dockage, obviously that's their business. So if we left it like this, what is our harm? What's the potential worst case scenario versus changing it?
I'm going to tell you what I have seen happen, and this is really my concern. My concern is this is accessory use. And so if we have under here something that says utilized as a principal or accessory structure, then we're taking this accessory use and, to me, confusing it in this section. If we want it to be a principal use in situations, then it needs to not be in the accessory, it needs to be in the principal. That's my point. Because what happens is, 10 years down the road, somebody's going to be confused, and they're going to say, well, it said it could be a principal or accessory under accessory, so now we can do da-da-da-da. That's the only thing, because it's showing it as accessories in all these other areas, all these other zoning areas. So if there was a way to clarify.
It's sort of six, half dozen another, and as I stated, it's a unique situation. So you're trying to figure out what's the best way to do this. If you're already you have water transportation in here that allows for some of these other things. Really, what we're getting at is trying to understand how do we interpret that if someone buys a residential waterfront lot, making it clear that they can put a dock out there. They don't necessarily have to have a house. And it is going to be rare instances, and that is really what that sentence is intended for. The only, you can put it back in there, but remember it's under that non-residential uses, and you guys have been very clear that there's some distinctions you want to make about residential uses. So it can go in there. I've worked in another jurisdiction that it is in there in both places, which also causes confusion. I mean, there's going to be confusion one way or another on this topic, I'm afraid, but no matter which way you choose to do it. So it's sort of the pleasure of the board. My recommendation would be to leave it as is with that clause, knowing that there's going to be very rare instances, isolated incidences, that it's going to be a principal use of the lot. And certainly over time it will become an accessory.
Paint me a picture then of what a principal use would be in a residential area.
It would be a house. And the reason why this sentence is in here is most for there to be an accessory, you have to have a principal. And so in most ordinances say that you can't have an accessory use without there being a principal. For example, you wouldn't want someone to be able to build just a shed or a garage on a vacant lot without having the house. A dock is a little bit different. And there are some places that don't allow a dock to exist without the principal structure in place. Again, we're going down a big rabbit hole here on a unique situation, but it is unfortunately fairly complex.
So, are we allowing then a dock on a vacant lot? Does this allow a dock on a vacant lot?
Yes, ma'am, and as is traditionally been the case here, there hasn't been a lot of, regulations surrounding them. We're trying to put in place what you're currently permitting and in the future want to permit, but, making it clear here.
So with this, we will permit a dock on a lot that doesn't have anything else on it. Is that correct?
And that's been permitted all along.
I think my conflict is, I think in business, those are principal uses. And
And this is residential.
residential, it goes across the span. What we talked about is open space being residential. So I guess if there was a way to clarify, within business, I'm going to use just an example, like say a marina, that's a principal use of a dock, but not an accessory use. So if there's a way to clarify it because of interpreting it either way.
I mean, you do have a marina use, and then you also do have water transportation that you already have, and so we can add, if it's a pleasure of the board, if you guys are more comfortable putting this in also under the non-residential uses, let's please do that, and we can just move on. You're allowing them principally already. This is, the isolated incident where somebody also in the open space district happens to have a vacant lot and they build a dock before they build a house. It's going to be a fairly rare occurrence. But, we can remove that sentence from accessory and then just essentially take this exact same use standard. It will also be repeated then under the non-residential uses in the table and the use standards there as well.
I'm just curious, how are docks identified as principal in commercial, as an example? Identified as principal or accessory?
There's a use called water transportation, including docks, tugboats, barges, and excursions on page 3-25. The only issue there is water transportation isn't permitted in the open space, and so again, it gets those very rare instances where you got a vacant lot in the open space that they want to have a dock, and so it's again, it's tough to figure. Yeah. Is there a pleasure of the board one way or the other they want to handle this? Is there a pleasure of the board, you know, is there a particular way you all want to handle this? Do you want to leave, you know, the sentence in place that says they can be principal accessory, or do you want to also add it, re-add it to the non-residential use table?
I'd like to keep it in place. Anyone else?
So add it to the table? Or leave the sentence in place, not re-add it, okay. My understanding is that we're gonna insert the POA, HOA language, and that's it, correct? And then we won't bother with that, re-adding it into the, is that table? Okay. No, it's up to you.
Put it in both places, that way it can't be misconstrued, like in business and that sort of thing.
Okay,
It can also be principal.
sure.
Thomas, is that confusing to you? If it is, then I'll just be quiet. Is it covered under marina? It doesn't have that same language that they had in water taxi.
Well, it's mainly water transportation, is if we're talking about docks. You know, depending on whatever a marina would have, I don't know. But yes, it's water transportation would be, you know, your principal dock use type of facility. The issue is again, the open space. And that's that clause. But okay, so we've got a statement from one alderman, another one that wants, you know, conflicting ideas here. I think we're going to need to probably take a vote here or come to some sort of.
If you're comfortable with it, I'm okay. If you're comfortable that this is clear to enforce, then I'm okay.
I think you cannot foresee everything. In, you know, going through these instances, I think it is more or less a footnote because it's going to be so rarely. It's going to come up very rarely. And so it goes against it goes against the structure of the ordinance, and we don't have any other instances like this. I think it's probably best to leave it as is and just leave that sentence there.
So, just so everyone knows, you're talking about that last sentence that you said we thought we were going to remove, and now we're keeping it. Docks may be utilized as a principal or accessory structure where permitted. Is that so? It's going to stay in there. I just want to clarify that. So it was going to be taken out, but now it's going to stay in. So we're all good with that, John Allen? You good with that? Okay. All right. Okay. City planner, you're clear with this? Okay, thank you. All right, next item.
Okay, so I think we had a comment on 331, and then Alderman Marsteller, you had another comment before we got to Oh, wait, are we, I think maybe we are on to 394. 394.
Just out of curiosity, was the planning board informed of this meeting?
What was your question? Absolutely, it's a joint workshop, yes.
Okay.
Yes. The timing, they work, so at 1:30 is not a good time for most members.
They probably don't want to hear the word UDO again or acronym, frankly. Okay, 394. Question on lighting and applicability about exempting redevelopment. I think this is just sort of another, policy question or thoughts behind it. 394D.
Yeah, that's the intent, is if we had a major redevelopment proposed for a property, should we then have them conform to the new standard instead of giving them a pass? That was the point for that applicability section.
Yeah, I agree. Redevelopment and addition. I mean, if they're doing you would hope they'd bring lighting in to compliance with the ordinance, I would think, if you were doing, construction, whereas not necessarily in change in use. If change in use may just be from one store to the next or something.
So this would be reworded to just say changes of use do not trigger applicability, and you'd strike redevelopment and addition.
That mean they'd have to come in compliance for that? Is that how you would interpret that?
That's correct.
I'm comfortable with that. Redevelopment, addition, struck, changes of use do not trigger. Is that okay?
Okay, another question about fixture height, with wanting them to be at 50 feet or wide, restricted at 50 feet versus 15 feet. This is sort of what folks are typically. This is a standard that's used more commonly nowadays. So you've got a pedestrian scale type fixture, and not the older style Cobra heads. It's sort of up to you guys. I mean, I do understand, the comment.
But it also, if you use it lower, it also sheds shorter. You know what I'm saying? The lower it is, the more controlled it is, which to my way of thinking is actually the opposite. If you're up higher, you have more.
I think, so looking at lighting, my whole take was there's so many things changing with lighting. That's the conversation with Brunswick Electric and everything. The example is our pier lights. They're now solar powered and everything, and so things are changing. And I live in a community that has lights that are very short, and they are literally outside people's bedroom windows. I mean, it's so annoying that they placed those lamps before the houses were even built, and it's like having the moon shining in your bedroom some nights. So I thought maybe it'd be better if there was flexibility. Instead of saying it can't be more than this height, you can't exceed 40 feet, total. And then maybe with time, when we talk about lighting fixtures and everything, we can maybe guide developers to go with even a lower light so that if it's a pedestrian area, it just lights the sidewalk. It doesn't have to be 15 feet tall or whatever, lighting everything. But your intersections and stuff where you have cars and people intersecting, then you do have a taller light, so you will light the whole area. But pathway lighting, I think, is evolving so much that it could be shorter, you know, that wouldn't interfere with somebody's windows, but it would also illuminate sidewalks. And I think just thinking bigger picture than what we've traditionally been doing, and that's where talking with Brunswick Electric and things like that might be helpful. And instead of specifying it all in the UDO, having a policy that has that flexibility to change when new products come available, because you can't change the UDO every year. That would be insane. But having that policy, so referring to a policy document that we have on hand, you know, that kind of direction is where I'm coming from. Deborah Fish said, yeah, there's so many things happening right now with outdoor lighting. It's really challenging to write it all in your UDO. She didn't recommend it. So that's where I'm coming from.
Isn't this what we're talking about? It says that 1 and 2 family residential uses are exempt from the requirements.
Existing, but a new subdivision would have to comply with this. But yeah, so if it's just a vacant lot that, you know, obviously they're not going to have to, and someone's coming to build a single family structure, that they're not going to have to comply, but a major subdivision would have to comply. You know, Alderman Sharkey has a very good point. Then this is sort of up to you guys how you want to handle it. You don't really have clear lighting standards as is. You know, one of our charges as part of this was to put in something in place, and so, you know, that's what you have before you. So it's up to you all. I think it would not be unwise to just say nothing higher than 40 feet, and then to leave yourself some flexibility and point yourself to a policy, and let you guys sort of figure it out in a little bit more detail at another time.
I don't,
That.
it art. I don't think I understand.
It says where adjacent to sidewalks, light fixtures may not exceed 15 feet. And that's where
That's creating
that's
pedestrian.
where they are really intrusive
But
right
I think
now.
the policy, you know, the policy which we haven't gotten yet, this is, if we get this in place, at least we have this, and then we can work on a policy. And this is a living, breathing document. At least this gives us some, you know, it manages it till we have a policy that's complete. That may take a lot longer to do.
I'm comfortable with some of the elements of this, but once we get to the light source section, that's where I think we really need to examine that, you know, that we would adopt a standard that is 3,000 Kelvin when DOT's using 4,000. I think that really puts us at a disconnect between what the state is using and what's even been already implemented in different streets here. We're talking about, and that's why I was suggesting a standard where you start getting into foot candle charts and stuff like that, so you accomplish your lighted area and all those things.
So, and I can understand maybe if there was some major policy, but what, I went through a lot of different UDOs for other towns, and correct me if I'm wrong, Wes, most of it is more general. The only time I saw a foot candle application had to do with electronic variable message signs. That's the only in a UDO that I saw, what I saw.
I'm not suggesting putting it in the UDO, making a policy and write in the UDO, refer to Southport light policy for this section, so that your policy gets updated regularly, but not the UDO.
We did for streetlights. We've already done that in the UDO for streetlights. And also, if we're talking about color temperature and that sort of thing, in that email from DOT, it also stated that if there are any biologically sensitive areas, a lower Kelvin temperature may be warranted by the city. They have agreed, DOT has agreed to use 3K fixtures in a project in Asheville that spans several bat-sensitive areas. So I would beg the question that we are in a biologically sensitive area, and that would be appropriate. So if we're just talking about color temperature, that would seem consistent with what DOT stated.
Well, I'm sure they have a biological study on file for those areas. Here's the other point I would just like to make about choosing a different color or lumen or Kelvin. So HOAs are responsible for their lighting, right? So if we adopt this where it would be a different standard and they need to go to Brunswick Electric to buy their supplies, they're going to have to be not special ordered, which isn't a problem. But in the case of where you need a number of them, they're going to have to stockpile them and keep them separate and things like that. That kind of stuff was explained to me with if the city chose to do that. That Brunswick Electric is not going to be in the business of stocking a different color because the DOT standard is 4,000. So street lights for them is that's that grade for now. Unless DOT changes, Brunswick Electric, who's the major electric supplier, is not changing. You can order them, but you would have to then probably provide your own storage area for them. And if you have maintenance issues that need to be done in a rapid fashion, you'd have to have so many on hand. Because the light fixtures look exactly the same. The only thing different is when they're illuminated. They have that different color tone. I don't think that's a fair burden for my HOA to have to do, or any of the new HOAs that are going to be, in the future. I just don't think that's a fair financial situation for them to have to do that.
I think that this is evolutionary technology, and we are now here. 3 or 4 years ago, I had the occasion to be at a conference where Duke Power was, and they were using 4K then, and he said because 3K had not technologically gotten where it needed to get. And when you look across the United States, cities, Seattle's using 3K, Portland, different cities through the Midwest and the East Coast are using 3K color temperature. So I would like, here we are trying to set ourselves on the course of the future, and this is the future, rather than staying with old technology. I hear what you're saying about policy, and we do need the streetlight policy, and we reference that, but I think for the benefit of and planning board, correct me, but I think for the UDO, for the benefit of this for now, I think this is a good plan.
Yeah, but if you look at the email that I forwarded to you guys and asked you to read, the other element DOT took in consideration was that research has shown that driver detection distances are greater with 4,000 Kelvin due to emitted pure white color. So they're doing it for more than just because that was what was available. They're basing it on studies that said pure white color is a safer illumination for drivers. So if we want to avoid conflicts between pedestrians and cars, we should use the best lighting technology available. If we're concerned about light pollution, we can address that with solar, we can address that with dimmers, we can address that with spacing. That's why the foot candle charts come into play. There's other means to address if we're concerned about over illuminating the sky. The types of fixtures so that it always shines down, the height of the fixtures so it's only illuminating a sidewalk and not houses. Like I said, if right now in this day and time, we would be asking a homeowners group to take on that extra responsibility when, it seems unreasonable to do that.
Anybody that exists now, I would assume, are grandfathered in to whatever they have. And I think it's fair to want to have the best for our city. I mean, that's what I think. And I think this, this is newer technology, and I think, I think we're just going to have to agree to disagree about it. But
Well, I agree with Karen in that, you know, the majority of the city is not in an HOA, for starters. And something that will be of greater benefit to the greater community should be our priority. And there are environmental benefits as well as the reducing light pollution and so on to going down to 3,000. So I hate to think of placing a financial burden on an HOA, but as Karen said, this could be this is an evolving technology, but for an HOA in replacing things as they burn out would replace with the 3,000 as opposed to having to wholesale replace everything.
I'm sure probably whatever's existing would be grandfathered in, and they would replace with whatever they've been using, I'm guessing. This would be for new projects and city projects, signage, those kinds of things.
So this would apply to all new construction, non-residential, multifamily development and major subdivisions. Redevelopment would also apply, and the additions would also apply. So changes of use would not apply.
That's reasonable.
Why is it preferred that we use incandescent fluorescent metal halide and color corrected sodium pressure versus LED?
I don't recall specifically the reason for that. I believe this is well, incandescent fluorescent and metal halide is, typically folks are moving away from those. I don't recall. I'd have to go back on why LEDs are not preferred. But they are. I mean,
they can be used. They're not prohibited. It says the administrator can approve them. So if somebody wants to use them, they're welcome to do so. You referenced a lighting plan or something. Was there a committee from the Board of Aldermen that worked on that or something? I mean, what is that?
Yeah, but it's not been completed. So that's why I'm saying we go with this.
Yeah. I'd like to see us just go ahead and adopt this, and we can work on making it better at a later date and not let perfection be the enemy of good.
So basically, I just wanted to get it straight. The lights that you have, you can keep. The new lights will be modernized. Is that right? Is that how it basically flows? It was like, if you like your health insurance, you get to keep it.
Unless for a commercial property goes to have any sort of redevelopment take place, they would have to tear down what they have and come into compliance with this, or replace, if it's bulbs, replace bulbs, etc.
Okay, so for new redevelopment, that's when the change will take place. Otherwise, the 4K that you have would remain as such. Okay.
So there's two questions, and let's go back and answer one first, because we started talking about height, and then we started talking about light source. So is the pleasure of the board, we're just going to have a single clause that says nothing higher than 40 feet? Is that, or was that, are we still in discussion on that?
maximum 15 is within non-vehicular pedestrian areas. So I don't know why that would be a problem. And I understand about the lower and coming up with policies like that, Laura. I think that's a great idea. Pathway lights and that sort of thing, for sure. But it says 40 feet in height within a parking lot or street right-of-way maximum, and a maximum of 15 feet in non-vehicular pedestrian areas.
I have a better picture of what we're talking about. On the pier, the fishing pier, how high are those?
I'm not sure.
I mean, I have no sense of height like that, so I don't know. So I'm trying to
Those are also not cut-off fixtures, so those wouldn't be allowed to be placed in the new subdivision, for example. What you're looking at is something similar to out here in the yard outside of the community center.
Okay.
Those 15 feet on the pier, perhaps, give or take a couple feet.
So city street lights affixed to utility poles, how high are those?
Those can be 40 feet. This is talking about, so if you're adjacent to a sidewalk, cannot exceed 15 feet.
How about right now, what are they?
Yeah, what now? What are they now?
I don't believe you
I'm
have
trying to get
anything
a
in place.
comparison
Whatever
in my mind.
Brunswick Electric is their standard.
New streetlights, the poles are 40 feet.
Yeah, I mean, I
So,
think they're 40
like
feet,
the
but I don't
domed
know.
light out there, I think that's a 40-foot pole. And that's the standard we've been using for replacement where underground has gone in and stuff like that. They're putting the new poles in, they're 40 feet.
So just texted Ellie for confirmation on both of those.
So when we're going on roads and like on Stewart Avenue, they won't be on telephone poles anymore. They'll be standalones. And though anything new that we do underground will go to if we change it, will go to the new technology, right? My sense of height and depth is terrible too, but I don't think they're 40 foot. Because the marina's 50, right? So that's 40 is a 4-story building. Even that one, I don't see it as that tall. So, what Ellie says, for sure. One other, as you're talking about this, there's the Presbyterian Church has a parking area, and I continually get calls that those lights are right next to a residential. Would those be grandfathered? Those are probably going to be higher than this 15 foot that would be allowed when it's attached next door to a residential. That's the crux of this, right? Gotcha.
The statement here, it says, anything within 50 feet of a residential use shall not exceed 15 feet in height. So if they redevelop the property, yes, they would need to comply. Those lights would need to, come into compliance. So, I don't know where are we at the point where we're leaving the language in place as is, or is the pleasure of the board to, strike the additional height requirements and just say lighting fixtures shall be a maximum of 40 feet?
they're doing a study on this and it hasn't been completed, maybe it's right. Maybe we should leave it and wait until the study is completed.
Leave the language as is, as
Well,
proposed.
That seems to be maybe the best way to do it.
Okay.
I agree.
Okay. Seems to me that's perhaps the majority of the board. Is that, are we going to proceed as is?
Yes, we'll go with that and proceed as is, yes, thank you.
Okay. The only change then I just want to clarify is the applicability change will go into place here. And that will state that redevelopment and addition, take that out so it's clear that they are subject to these requirements. Everything else will remain.
I would like to have the light source lamp removed for the time being and leave the other sections as is. But I think that's where the group needs to come together, make a final decision on what the lamp sources will be so that we have a standard throughout the city, because otherwise we're going to have pink light on some streets and white light on other streets. So we need to resolve that, and then you can talk about spacing and things like that and height. But for now, I would just leave it as is, but take out the lamp source so that we can have a standardized light standardized light throughout the city. That makes sense, so that one street has the same lighting as the next street.
Well,
If we take all that out, then we are also taking out the provision that the temperature doesn't exceed 3,000. And I think that's an important provision to include in. I mean, we've got a lot of new development happening right now, and they would fall under this probably now. I mean, would fall under it.
Provide me the
now.
documentation that's really best. Provide the documentation, scientific proof that that's the best lighting. Because I'm arguing that lighting can be best if you do it with appropriate spacing, you do it with appropriate fixtures, you do it where you shut it off when you don't need it, things like that. The Kelvin I don't think is important as we're making it out to be, other than if we require this, you're then saying, well, we're going to have a group of people with this color light in their neighborhood and another group of a different color light in another neighborhood, and then city streets are going to be lit with a different color. I mean, you're just going to have variations through town. You're not going to have a standardization.
well, there's not standardization now, Laura. I think this is what we're trying to do, is create standardization, because there hasn't been standardization. I can take you all over town and show you different colors.
4,000 could be the standard.
But 3,000 could be the standard.
You're
And
not going
that's-
to have it with your state roads. So you're going to go in and out of, I'm saying, different areas. It just doesn't
are
seem to
those
make
not our
sense
street
when there
lights?
isn't the scientific proof to make it 3,000, and you have to work harder to put the
Are
3,000 in because it hasn't been adopted statewide.
But
Is there scientific proof that 4,000 is better?
Driver studies, yes. The visibility, yes. When it comes down to biological impact, the biologists are saying it's the amount of light we're putting up. That's why we need to be judicious in how much lighting we put out there, whether it's LED, incandescent, fluorescent, whatever. And LED aren't the worst as far as lumens. If you looked at the other section where they talked about how much lumens we're actually putting out now with our old lights, we're putting out a lot more than we could be if we switched over to LED lights. I mean, this was some information that Clayton just offered up in the discussion to try to show how it's not just, we shouldn't fixate on 4,000 or 3,000. We should look at the impacts as far as applicability, standardization, cost, just a bigger picture than just an argument over a color tone, because that's what that means. It's an argument over color tone. It's not an argument over efficiency or if, cost as far as savings and things like that, money. It's an argument over color tone. It's going to have a slightly pink tone if you go with a 3,000. It's going to be a clear white if you go with 4. That's your difference.
It's not pink, it's a warmer yellow, warmer light, which is, in my way, is more in character with our town. I mean, if we were just going that, but I do think what's going to happen is, as it's happening across the country, people are going to 3K. So I don't know why we would set our standards less than that.
The white light is a whole lot less appealing and much less in character with our historic town than something that's much warmer. Not that much dimmer, I don't think. So what is the problem seriously with keeping this? It can be modified. This is a living document. And if we come to find out that 3,000 is a very undesirable standard, then we can change it. But for now, with a lot of new development and construction happening as we speak, let's go with the 3,000.
Not what Brunswick Electric stocks. That's why. That's what I'm trying to say. The standard has been set at 4,000.
We pay them. So, I mean, they, you know, and I appreciate it. We love them. But we also, it's our city and we pay for this. So it should be whatever developmentally we want for our city, I think.
I'm not going to be, you know, we're definitely experts in lighting color, and I'm working on a headache right now. But what I'm hearing is state roads are 4,000 K, correct? So Leonard, Howe, Moore will be 4,000 K. And when we talk about uniform, then we're going to switch to our private roads that we develop, and when we go underground, they'll be 3K, so there won't be a consistency. Is that how that's
The only
work?
thing that occurs to me, Mark, that's a great question. The only thing that occurs to me in this email that Laura had, it looks like we could ask the state to do 3K because we are an environmentally sensitive area. So I think we could find our consistency in all of that.
So we're going to get the state to change the way they do things.
Because everything's evolution. They're doing 4K because the technology's been around longer than the 3K. That's what, you know, within a town like this.
Ray, I think a majority of the board's already expressed a desire to leave this section as it is and let the lighting committee's recommendations come back at a later time for possible changes to it.
Yeah, I thought that's what I had expressed about 15 minutes ago, that we were going to leave it. As we talked about the new, in West, Thomas, correct me if I'm incorrect, that the new projects, the new developments would have to go with 3K according to this, but if you were 4K, you could leave it as that for the time being until something else changed. Okay. Is that the pleasure of the majority of the board? I mean, if you'd like a vote, I mean, we can do a vote. Is there a motion to move on, but also to keep it at, if it's new development or if it's redevelopment, is it 3K? And if you have...
The only other question I had, and I'm not going to belabor it, Laura, you had mentioned in your notes about spotlights and doing away with spotlights. You had that reference, and if that were going to,
Brunswick Electric, do away with spotlights.
So we could put that as fixture. Did you have a plan? It could be number 4 under fixtures. Add spotlights are prohibited in all residential and commercial properties. Is that spotlights? You don't want spotlights.
I mean, Brunswick County's already adopted that, apparently, so
If
we
we could
just
add that
go
as
into
number 4.
compliance as spotlights are not acceptable fixtures or something.
add that as a number 4 there, Wes?
Yes, and it sounds to me like you just want spotlights prohibited outright, so it'd just be spotlights are prohibited throughout the city.
I'm not in violation. I have a motion sensor spotlight in my backyard. It kind of angles down, but it keeps me from falling on my face between.
That's a
cars.
floodlight. That's a different.
That's not a spotlight.
No.
Light fixture is normally a rather large type of fixture you might see in a parking lot where cars or parking lots for, merchandise, or they want to highlight a sign, something like that, really large, big picture light.
Do we need a definition of what a spotlight is, just to make sure that, or is it commonly enough understood? When I think of a spotlight, I'm thinking of a big thing you do it.
Yeah, the signaling Batman. Yes,
Yeah,
exactly. Yes, we can add a definition.
Okay, so did we have that motion? Is there a motion about 3K and 4K? And add the spotlight. Okay.
So, in one, redevelopment addition, get rid of that, and then add spotlights as number 4.
Okay, there's the motion. Is there a second? Okay, second by Lo Davis. Any further discussion? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Motion carried. Thank you.
Okay, are we on to page 3-113?
I have a question about 3104 before then, if we can. For buffers, page 3-104. Talking about buffers, I don't think we have, and maybe we do. Do we have anything where there needs, that requires a buffer between, commercial and residential, specifically between BD and residential? We have a lot of instances where BD and residential adjoin each other, and there doesn't appear to be, there's no setbacks in BD, right? So.
And that's precisely why, you've got no setbacks in here, and so we discussed this somewhat at length with the planning board, the width of those lots and the ability to have a buffer and so forth, and that there aren't any setbacks required. So certainly you can put in a buffer requirement here. It was removed in keeping with the setback requirement, so as not to conflict.
We used to have one, it was removed. Is that what we're saying, or not?
That's correct. We more closely aligned your setbacks, your buffers with your setbacks. Where possible, it's usually good to not have those two items conflict. It can cause some confusion and consternation, certainly when investor or whoever's buying a property, they're basing on the setbacks, building envelope, come to find out there's a buffer, etc. But it can be added back in.
would it create huge confusion if you had a setback requirement where commercial or industrial is adjacent to residential? And then also put in a buffer, some kind of screening requirement?
Up to Thomas. Thomas might prefer to just have a buffer rather than a setback per se, but it is going to be confusing. I mean, inherently, there's a reason why those setbacks are that way. My guess is that they've been that way a long time, and that somehow the buffer standards got put in, and there wasn't a lot of thought as to, well, we've got no setbacks. Why are, you know?
I'd just really like to see us have some type of screening, but between commercial and residential. I mean, if my backyard backed up, to a commercial lot, it would certainly be nice to have something there to lessen the noise and visual impact.
And we do have a lot of instances, the businesses, restaurants, and so on along House Street back up to residences. And I get calls and complaints from people saying, when are they going to quit with the live music? We want to go to sleep. And it's like, it's in our living room. And I mean, the buffer, we're talking, I assume, more about visual buffers as opposed to noise buffers.
The city's noise ordinance would be something that would need to handle that. I mean, it's a give and take. Obviously, the folks that are buying anything adjacent to House Street commercial property, it's already been there, and it's quite evident that that's a commercial corridor. But I think if you want to add something, I would recommend adding just a buffer, not necessarily modifying the setback with a footnote, and make it a 10-foot buffer or something to that extent. I know in the CBD that's almost impossible in most instances. Those parcels are almost entirely built out, and the BD, and we did talk about this. Those lots aren't very large either, so even 10 feet can be have some level of effect. But that would be my recommendation. Certainly, we should discuss it to what extent you all want to discuss it, and maybe just allow it, have the buffer adjacent where in BD where you're adjacent to R10 or R20.
Yeah, well, I'd probably say, I'd say more maybe with BD, HC, everything except CBD adjacent to residential require a type A buffer yard. Does that seem
Highway
reasonable?
commercial, you do. Highway commercial, you've got a buffer in here. Yeah, that's 40 feet. I think some of the thought was on trying to help preserve what's there in the BD. But yeah, you can break out the BD and put a 10-foot.
Well, yeah, I guess I'd propose then for BD, when it's adjacent to residential, that they type A buffer yard is required.
I agree with that.
I do too.
It will be a type A. You all have to also, is it 10 foot, or do you is that sufficient?
Isn't the setback 10 feet at the rear in BD? Did I make that up?
Might be right. I need to go look. But
Be the same. John, would that work? The 10 feet?
Yeah, that's fine.
But we're still keeping the solid walls or fences at 8 feet, right? Not 10 feet? No?
I think that's two different, and one's width and one's height, right?
Okay.
And that's, you know, a 10-foot buffer where adjacent to R10, R20, MF, MH, and O&I. Everything else would be no buffer required adjacent to highway, commercial, industrial. Oh, open space as well. You probably would want to. I don't believe there's any instances where you're adjacent to open space, but you know, those are city parks already. That would be. Do you want to have a buffer there or no?
That would really be for future. So if we do new parks and people beside business, it'd be good that it was, you know, had that same 10-foot buffer is not much.
Okay. Okay. Anything else prior to page 3-113? Thank you. Got it. Okay, so on 3-113, sounds like we've addressed are we going to discuss illumination again or?
No,
Okay.
no, that I think will be addressed if we have a policy group convene and develop a policy.
Okay.
The only thing is it could, in looking at other ordinances, one of the things that, and would there be any benefit of adding a C on number 4 that said signs should be, would this give our enforcement some, that says signs should be lighted only to the minimum level required for nighttime readability? I saw statements like that in several ordinances. I think it gives flexibility for them to say it's too bright. You know, you don't need it to be that bright for readable. I remember when all that green light was on the car wash place, and they were able, y'all had it toned down. So I didn't know if having a statement like that would be helpful.
The statement would be
signs should be lighted only to the minimum level required for nighttime readability.
Any objection to that? Okay. There's a question about feather flags, on, you know, if they're removed at the end of the business day, why should we, prohibit them? This is just sort of another policy item discussion that,
In my mind, they create excessive visual clutter and they're ugly. We've got a requirement that you can have one ground level sign, so I don't know why we'd create additional exemptions to that.
Flutter flags because they create motion and may be hazardous to motorists. The other thing is we have a temporary sign for our businesses with A-frame. We have a whole way that they can also have temporary signs in addition to their normal signage. So that already exists in this.
Eliminating flutter flags, feather flags, whatever we call them.
Just
right?
consistent with what the planning board has already decided.
Yes, okay.
I have something, just back up for a minute, 3-113 on the signs. It says, no permit shall be required, however, for maintenance of a sign. Shouldn't we add for maintenance of a sign, restore, as long as it's restored back to original condition and message? Would that help?
which,
Oh, I'm sorry, under applicability on page 3-113.
Bottom.
No permit shall be required, however, for maintenance of a sign, period. How about restored back to original condition and message, and you don't need a permit?
we can't necessarily say message, but you can say restored to original condition, just for content neutral.
Well, if somebody changed the message on it, wouldn't that constitute getting a new?
Yeah, I wouldn't go there. Just you just want to talk about, you know, condition, you know, structural type, basically the way that it is.
So when you take out a permit, message is not considered?
There's nothing in the ordinance that discusses what's on the sign, only
Okay.
the size of it,
All right.
the nature of it, how big it is, how tall it is, et cetera.
That it can't be obscene. There is that.
There is some that's very hard to have a content neutral sign regulation. We are trying the best to do that in your ordinance, but I wouldn't explicitly call out message in there. I think you're accomplishing the same thing, just saying, you know, condition.
So restored back to original condition. Okay.
And there is no permit required for a commercial property who changes occupants to bring a new sign to replace the original sign with a new business identity, right?
I mean, if they're just changing the lettering, you know, but if they are, you know, fully replacing the sign, then they should be actually getting a sign permit. It's I don't know.
What I'm talking about more about replacing an insert in a lighted sign or the face of a sign.
That's, you know, I would need to read your your ordinance a little bit more clearly, but it's when someone's coming out, putting something in the ground, you know, constructing a new sign is the intent of this sign ordinance, placing a new structure.
Just real quick to go back to the section Tom was talking about, I think we do have a little bit of a conflict there because it says, except as otherwise provided, it shall be unlawful to erect or maintain any sign without first obtaining a sign permit. No permit, however, shall be required for the maintenance of a sign. We might want to, I don't know if we need to take the first maintain out of there or change maintain to something else.
Should be another section here under C, signs exempt from permit requirements, that speaks to that. I need to read it really quick though.
By maintenance, I think about, refreshing the painting, things like that. Is that what we have in mind? Is that a board falls off, you replace the board?
I'm just saying we the way it's written now, there's a conflict because we say in one sentence, the first sentence says you have to get a permit to maintain a sign, and then the next sentence says you don't need a permit to maintain a sign.
The section in sign ordinances are perhaps the most bothersome of all for UDO administrators, but there's usually what they have is they have exempt from permit requirements and some applicability requirements. So on page 3-116 on 18, number 18, copy changes and maintenance, no permit required for copy changes, made to changeable copy sign, menu, etc. Basically, you don't have to get a permit if it does not change the classification of the sign. In other words, structurally alter what you have in place.
So would you remove that statement from here since you've got it over here? The second one where it says no permit shall be required, however, for maintenance? Since you've got it essentially here that says no permit shall be required for maintenance where no structural changes are made.
You can. I think this is really, they're two different things. You
That's
know,
good.
they could be argued as potentially one. One is somebody's maintaining their existing sign. The copy changes is if a new business, for example, comes in, they're changing copy and also doing some repair work, maintenance of the existing sign. Okay, anything else on signs? I think the next comment would be on stormwater regulation. Well, we've got some comments actually from Alderman Lombardi prior to that, I believe, on Article 4. But why don't we, so that we're done with one sheet, why don't we go ahead and finish this full sheet here, and then we'll go under to Alderman Lombardi's comments, so we're not bouncing back and forth. Comment is, what is the recommendation to update stormwater section of the UDO to be more effective managing higher amounts of rain and intense? And how does resiliency planning fit into the UDO? I think those are great questions. We sort of discussed this about, and I think maybe this was already been addressed in previous discussion about, consulting an engineer or a stormwater master planner or what have you to really understand how much water you need to capture, the types of materials, facilities, the whole bevy of things that I don't particularly have expertise on.
Your points are well taken. I think it was more of just that question of, there was a recommendation from the planning group when they reviewed the documentation on as far as, should we set a goal for, contracting with an engineer, or so we try to do it by a certain date? What was a recommendation, recognizing that it was beyond the scope of this committee to bring that standard up to a newer level for new events?
The answer is yes. Sorry. I think everybody on the planning board was in agreement that they thought the city needed to take a serious look at stormwater for the future, and I think all of you are probably in agreement as well, and things I've heard from everybody.
we did talk about stormwater at length and on multiple occasions of, steps that the city could take. I think that the planning board had the city's best interests at hand. I just don't think that, and it was understood going into this that we weren't really going to do a big stormwater overhaul, but it came to the conclusion that it needs to be a more thorough, comprehensive process than just trying to add some random standard in.
Assess based on your knowledge, is our current policy with stormwater more robust than the minimums of the state?
If I were
More stringent than the state's policies right now.
Yeah, so we're still above the minimum. Yeah, I wasn't sure where the state was with their evolution on stormwater too.
From what I understand, it's more stringent, but I think there are other coastal communities that certainly have more stringent stormwater policies than we have right now.
That's correct. You're similar to a lot of other coastal communities. You have small lots and fairly dense development, but you have even smaller lots in many cases. Your 3,000 square foot non-conforming lots, typically in your beach communities, it's going to be a 5,000 square foot lot. I mean, that's almost half the size. And so you've got a lot of those 5,000 square foot lots that you're retaining almost 30% in your beach community that has to be a pervious material. You're talking about doing that on a 3,000 square foot lot. So you guys really have it's gonna have to be some sort of unique situation. But I think that you need to proceed not only with your development regulations, but also the city in understanding how you all can help manage some of that stormwater in your right-of-ways, because I think that's going to be a key as well. And again, that's outside of this UDO, but one thing that I think is very helpful is doing watershed management plans. There's grants to do that, and that really gets at understanding how to reduce that flow of stormwater. That's really what is the problematic component of stormwater.
Are we saying that maybe the city should have somebody here on board to look this all over and take care of that, and have somebody that's knowledgeable about stormwater and infrastructure?
Not suggesting a city of 3,500 needs to have their own stormwater engineer, but on staff, you perhaps
not only stormwater, but every infrastructure
Sure.
in general.
That's going to be a policy decision for you guys. I do believe you do have an consulting engineer that you refer to. What happens in a lot of smaller jurisdictions, they've got perhaps more robust stormwater development regulations in place that are overseen by an outside firm. Everybody that comes in has got a stormwater plan that accompanies their single family lot. But me trying to understand what those standards are beyond my expertise, particularly with the situation that you've got on these in your dense conditions.
Just to be clear, kind of what Wes is saying, and what I was saying before, is that our stormwater regulations are more stringent than the state when it comes to new subdivisions and new commercial development. But kind of what Wes is saying is that our existing lots that are around town, our regulations are not quite in line with other coastal communities. But we also have a little bit of a different situation because we have so many small non-conforming lots.
The city has already started a stormwater management process to identify areas that are critical right now that we're having problems with. It's going to be important to bring in a professional stormwater engineer because we can't pick up stormwater from one particular location and dump it somewhere else. We have to have a plan citywide to address this problem. So we are already in the process of trying to develop a plan and get an engineer on board and procure some funding for that as well.
We can jump into the next set of comments unless the board wants to try to take a quick recess. I'll
If that section, I think it'd be a good time to take a break. Okay, let's take a 10-minute break. Thank you. Wes and Thomas. I believe we're all set to get started again and continue with the workshop. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mayor. We'll start with, I believe everyone has a copy of Alderman Lombardi's comments. The comments are on Article 4-8, page 4-8 on some of the street specifications. And I'll give a little bit of background on this, and that perhaps will help guide the conversation a little bit. Most, at least in our region, unless you're the city of Wilmington that has their own full-blown engineering department and a 300-page spec manual, most jurisdictions have, they refer to the NCDOT minimum standards in their subdivision manual. And there are some specifications in there for street construction. The ones, the reason these are in here is to make clear that these are the standards with which the city should proceed with, and I don't have the subdivision manual standards in front of me. I probably should have brought them, but okay. They are a little bit more stringent, thought being that it will hopefully leave the city in better standing for maintaining any streets or roads that they would take over, and this is, remember, this is only for a new subdivision, not, this has nothing to do with you guys already existing streets. So this would just be standardizing the minimum construction standards. Now, there's another train of thought here with this, is you can just defer only to the NCDOT standards, or similar to your stormwater management, go and work with an engineer and understand exactly what you want. I'm not an expert on this. I can tell you that these standards here are used in other jurisdictions throughout the state, and that getting too specific perhaps could be problematic in your UDO, and it'd be a situation where you want to have a policy or engineering spec manual that was developed for your roads, etc. But that's the background.
Yeah, well, I wasn't commenting on that so much as it says, it's indicating that you would use the base course and the top course with the same material. That's what it says SF 9.5A for both base and top, which means that you're not using the base material underneath the top course of asphalt. You're using the same material for both, which shouldn't be, because the B25.0B is their nomenclature for it, and it has larger stone and a different asphalt content, which is a base material. But they're just saying here, use top course on both courses, and it's got to be changed, because you don't do that. I mean, I don't think the state uses a fine mix for both base and top. I think it's just a mistake in here.
Gotcha. On number 3.
Yeah.
Yeah,
the base course is a B25.0B or OB,
okay.
and that should be the base, the 2 inches of base. Number 3, yeah. Yeah, 4-8, page 4-8. Of course, I've said this before, but I think that putting in a top course on a road with 60% of the houses built is a mistake. I know the state says it, but we can be different from the state, and I think 80% is more like it. Because now you have almost half the houses not built, and trucks and everything riding over a finished road. It's not right.
Can you help me out and tell me what should go down, and what are you recommending would go down until everything is built?
Just the base course.
Okay.
Yeah, the 2 inches of base course. No, 80% instead of 60. They say 60, but I think it should be 80. That's what I'm recommending.
Okay, so we've got the base course. Corrected, thank you. The other question is speaks to, I think, the 60%, and that can be, that can be up to 80. We do have a clause in here. Well, so the other, this is interconnected issue here, because the city has now made it, in your current ordinance, is no longer going to be accepting performance guarantees or bonds. So that what that means is that all of the infrastructure needs to be in place for that before that final plat is approved, except in only one instance, and that instance being that where at the time of final plat approval, they're not going to accept the improvements where less than 60% of the lots from the final plat have not been conveyed to individual ownership or issued a CO. Precisely to speak to that issue, the way they handle that in a lot of places, there's a workmanship guarantee or another bond that's put in place to ensure after all the homes are built that someone comes in with a final base course. Thomas and I and the Public Services Director talked about this at length, and our position is that the city wants to take those improvements at the time of final plat approval unless there's still some outstanding COs, and when they take them, if the developer damages that road, then he's going to be responsible for fixing it.
And how is he going to fix it? How do you feel he's going to fix that road?
There'll be an inspection prior to the city actually accepting those streets.
And most of the time it'll be a patch. What?
Not necessarily a particular objection. 80% would be fine.
So if the road is complete, I was hoping, and Thomas set me straight that we can't do that anymore, is to have a bond for 6 months after completion, and this way you're covered for 6 months. But I understand you can't do that. Of course, the state says you can't do it, which I don't understand why. But anyway, if in fact the road is damaged and it's finished, and instead of putting a patch, then we should require milling to take off an inch or an inch and a half of top course and then repave it. Because patches last for 2-3 years and they crack. And now the city's gotta go in and fix it.
We see that all over the city.
Yeah, of course. I mean, this is what I'm reading into this and what my experience is, so that's why I'm bringing it up. Because in no way here do we have any milling or in-place recycling, and there's no specs for city streets here either. If a city street is damaged, Caswell Avenue, somebody comes along, a builder, and destroys the street, how does he put that back? We don't have any referral to that, and there should be, because these streets are in terrible condition.
And now that is certainly outside of the UDO. That's going to be entirely separate issue
Okay,
that would be in your
that's fine,
in
yeah.
your general code. But you know, we can attend. So in your UDO, what we have is that the subdivider shall be responsible for repairing any damages or failures identified as a result of the inspection, and that's you know, of course, prior to the city accepting them. If you know, if there is a standard recommendation or some wording that you feel like would be best, that you know, that milling should be required. You know, I'm not a you know, a civil engineer or street construction company.
I'm not either, but I've been doing this for 50 years, so. It's
Where are
just
you looking? Where are you on the page where you were reading from?
Dash 4-5 under streets, and this is inspection under C.
I mean, I don't know if you say it doesn't apply to the UDO, so now should the city have a regulation that says, yes, you must mill if it's damaged to that point?
What if
Kinda
in,
going here.
what if under that 4.5C, you just say subdivider be responsible for repairing damages or failures identified as a result of the inspection to the satisfaction of the UDO administrator or the city's public works director or something like
Yeah,
that?
that would be great.
Yeah, to the
Can we just
yeah,
add some
to
language
the
like that?
satisfaction of the public services.
So they can assess,
Director.
the public works director can assess it, and, you know, if he thinks, hey, you need to remill this whole section from here to there and repave it, then that's what has to be done.
You need to, once we're past the UDO update, establish a policy on it. You know, that then the Public Works would, thank you, would refer to concerning milling and so on.
And at the same time, we would have in that regulation specification for city streets or local streets.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, developing your own technical manual that,
Right.
that would address those things. That's correct.
Thomas, we don't have any of that, do we? It is important, you know.
Do we need to consider later on establishing a committee to develop that manual? An Alderman committee to do that?
Well, you still need somebody.
I think you'd probably be better off letting staff put something together to bring to the alderman for consideration.
I think, yeah, with the help of somebody who is familiar with this.
I would just recommend trying to get a professional or have staff work with that. That way you're not burdening staff with an extra, you know, committee and minutes and et cetera, et cetera.
Last point is, are we going to change number 4 under C when each street has 60% or 80% of lots? Are we in agreement with 80? Sounds good to me, I mean, okay, so we'd like that change.
And just, I think this is just, will be a living document similar to, because you'll have folks complaining that their street's not paved. But anyways, it's just, you guys will have to see how it works.
You want me to go on to the next one? I was wondering why we refer to the Stormwater Drainage and Sedimentation Pollution Control Act of 1973, when there's one that's new, 2015. But you go on, and it does refer you to 2015, but it is a little complicated, I think. Because you have to go to different, it goes, you look up 1973 and it gives you that, but then it refers you to something else, and it's a little, I don't know, maybe we should just refer to that automatically instead of having to go through.
This is just this was in line with the Federal Clean Water Act, and then when states adopted their own statewide stormwater erosion sedimentation control. So this was the original adoption of statewide stormwater matters. Folks, whether or not you have it in here, folks must comply with the state regulation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does, but I just thought it would be a lot clearer if you referred to the one manual and you went right to it.
I would, if the 1973 is of concern, I would just strike of 1973 and just leave it all requirements of the North Carolina Sedimentation Pollution Control Act.
It just seems outdated, that's all.
Well, it's not, the intent is not to refer you to a manual, it's just to refer you to the law that was originally passed, whether or not the manual and specs have changed over time.
Another thing I suggested here is at the beginning or the end of these sections, how about putting in a list of DOT manuals that we live by? You don't have to have the actual manual, but maybe just a list, number that you can go to DOT and get. Because a lot of times it refers to a specific number, and many times it does not at all.
We've tried to, there may be instances, what we have, in reference to DOT under street design, it says the most recent version of and this is on page 4-7 at the top of the page on B1, the most recent version of the NCDOT subdivision roads minimum construction standards and NCDOT guidelines for drainage and hydraulic design. And we've also made it clear, unless it establishes a stricter standard, which would be in the case of the street construction standards. But I think they're actually in the process of updating that 2010 manual, and who knows how long this UDO will be in place. I would just kind of leave it as most recent version, or if there's another place, perhaps we need to just make it more general.
Yeah, we'd be in the position of having to track whenever DOT changes anything and inserting the new numbers into the UDO, and we might get called at some point, in a bind because our UDO would be referring to something that's out of date, and it could mess us up.
Yeah, I'm just not used to knowing this, so that's why. I just have one more thing to say, and I think we've already said it, but I think that having an engineer is going to be great if we can get one. And second of all, I think what's most important is that as these developments occur and as this work is being done, that there's somebody that's knowledgeable that could go on the site and see what's going on. Because no matter what you put in this UDO, does not cover everything that can go on in the course of a development. And if somebody with knowledge to go there and look at it and say, hey, wait a minute, that's not what you should be doing. And I think that's what we're lacking. And I think that's how we get into trouble. So again, that's not maybe in the UDO, but it's something we have to do.
That's a wise and timely comment. I mean, this is a discussion that we had with David, the Public Services Department, Thomas. We went back and forth on, what should be in the UDO. Should some inspection procedures be in there, or should they be left out? And Thomas and I will agree that what you have in here is not perfect, but at least it's a start. And yes, absolutely, you're correct. There needs to be a standard protocol and procedure, because, you know, whenever you are accepting infrastructure, you should not be thinking of it as an infrastructure. You should be thinking of it as a liability that you're accepting. And you want to ensure that that is up to standards, and so that you're not going to turn around and be hit with a huge, basically, financial burden by accepting something that was not properly constructed or with improper materials, etc. So yes, absolutely. And it is one of the hardest things for smaller jurisdictions to do, because it takes time, but it's very important. And so there are some procedures in here. Again, we are not suggesting that they are the best, but we're hoping it's at least the starting point, and they may end up coming out, and they may end up being part of a spec manual and inspection manual and policies that are somewhere else. And that's on page 4-5. Anything else? There is a, let's see, 80%, the table of contents. Yes, the table of contents will be updated. Yes, sir.
What's the 3.7E impact to city infrastructure?
That's on page 3-39.
Yeah, I'd like to see that added, John, because it should be a consideration in any development, that what you're going to affect the rest of the city with.
Was added.
I think
Yep.
you added that
Yep.
already.
Yep. Any other comments? Okay, that, unless I missed, well, actually, there's two other definition comments for parks and recreation municipal areas.
To the definitions, either one of those wording that just clarifies it. Because sometimes I think parks and recreation areas get mixed up with open space in subdivisions conversation, or so just saying parks and recreation areas municipal means government established community parks and recreation areas, just something simple. And that would be like on page 8-30, just in alphabetical order. 30, and it's just a definition in alphabetical order.
The request is to add a definition of parks and recreation areas municipal that would comprises government established community parks and recreation areas would be added.
Would that be your choice of those two?
I think that.
Okay.
Unless I'm mistaken, that concludes at least the written comments that I have before me. The next step is, if there is any other comments, then we should address them at this moment. Otherwise, if the city is proceeding, the next step would be to schedule a public hearing to consider this for adoption. Depending on how the rest of this workshop goes, of course, all of these changes will be incorporated and the document updated. We would like to have at least a week I think, Thomas and I, to make sure that we've got all the changes, and make sure there's no, typos, et cetera. The pages are numbered correctly. But we'll need about a week. So with that, I'll turn it back to Mr. Mayor. Madam Chair, and thank you also for that comment on this section. There is one other item. If it's okay with the board, Thomas and I also discussed actually taking this review procedures manual out of the UDO and it being a standalone document that could be on the city's website. That way it can be edited without going through the formal process. All this is a helpful checklist for the community, not only you all, but staff as well. So there's no substantive, language in here. So it sounds like there's no objection to that. Okay.
Will that apply to Exhibit A as well?
A will remain, but B is a review procedures manual, and B1 is already contained. B1 is the summary is actually in your ordinance, but all these other items are really can just be little PDFs that the city can have, and if someone wants to have a site plan, they can just click on it, tell them exactly what they need to do.
All right, Wes and Thomas, thank you. What a excellent process, a long process, a worthy process, and a livable process, one that will continually be updated. In terms of, is there anyone else that has anything that they need to add in terms of the UDO review workshop? Any of the aldermen, city planner, Wes, Madam Chairman? Okay. City manager? Okay. So now what we need to do is pick a date and a time for our public hearing. So, Wes, do you have some recommendations, limitations in terms of your schedule, Thomas?
Well, it just needs to be advertised a minimum of 10 and 25 days before the public hearing in the paper, 2 consecutive weeks. So we would just need to make sure that we give ourselves enough time to meet that requirement.
So Wes, would it be ready by, say, the 17th? You think you'll be ready by next week for it to?
Next Monday, yes, that would be my hope. That I'll make it happen. That you can have the final document by then. And I also have. We'll do this after, but I have the land use plan update to give you all too. I don't want to forget. Yes, by the 17th, and so that gives you advertising when on the 19th. And so is that looking into the first week of September? Okay. So September 3rd, that is Labor Day weekend is the only. I don't know if folks are going to start getting out of town on Thursday or what have you. That Monday, the 7th.
what about the 31st? Is that, what's your schedule, Wes?
Available the 31st. Do we have enough days there, Thomas? I didn't count.
It'd be 12 days. Yeah. My only comment is just that it would give 12 days from the date of publication for people to review it and be prepared. So,
And that's adequate time, right? That would be.
well, according to the state, it is, but it's really what y'all think as well.
Has it already been on the website and available?
The current draft has been.
Yeah,
That is
yeah.
correct.
Okay, which is the lion's share of it.
Well, I think we did have this meeting scheduled as 3:30, but it'd probably be a good idea to push that back
Do
to
it
give
in the evening because people would not.
exactly
that
to
are
give
working and that
to get
type
the
of thing.
maximum amount of participation. That'd probably be best.
Wes, what's your schedule on the 31st?
31st is fine. I'm available. I can be here at 6.
So that is exactly 3 weeks from today. Okay. All right. Any further comments in terms of the workshop?
Oh, I would just like to thank Wes and Thomas. This has been over a year and a half in the making, and it has taken it's been a huge, the planning board, all of their participation, and so I just want to acknowledge what an amazing, I mean, because this is, most people don't, when you go into a UDO, you're just changing some stuff. This is a whole restructure, and that's why it's been so complicated.
Mr. Lombardi, any comments? Okay, Lo Davis? Absolutely. Alderman Sharkey?
Just appreciate everyone's contributions. Thank you.
My friend?
Extend my gratitude and thank you so much for your hard work.
Okay. Mr. Allen?
Ditto to what everybody said. Thanks, Wes.
So in summation, you see a very grateful Board of Aldermen, City Manager. Madam Chairman, thank you. Thomas, thank you for all you do city planning wise. And Wes, thank you for being here. You're like part of the family now, so you've been here so much.
Something else.
Tanya, City Clerk, thank you for being here and for the minutes. Lisa, thank you, Public Information Office, Department of Tourism, for being here and bringing it to our citizens. And Mr. Alt will give you the award for longevity in terms of being here through the process. Thank you as well. If there are no
I hate to interject. I got one more stack of paper to give you guys, and
Please,
I
that's
do
fine.
apologize.
That's fine. We're good.
So you're almost done with me, I promise. So if you recall, as part of this process, we also endeavored to update the policies in your land use plan and your future land use map. We did not touch the rest of the document. We just wanted to align your policies in your future land use map, really what you have on the ground today, and just provide a better foothold. The city will need to update its land use plan comprehensively in the future, but this will put you in a little bit better standing moving forward and helping you to understand how to manage development. At that public hearing, you can also, I don't think you want to include, yeah, okay. So I'll leave it up to Thomas and Gordon to schedule another workshop, or however you want to handle this, or if you just want to hold a public hearing at your regular meeting. we can certainly get into all the specifics to whatever detail you would like. I can tell you that we spent a good amount of time updating these policies with the planning board over more or less two consecutive sessions. Once about 18 months ago, and then another time about 2 months ago. So review them as you feel comfortable doing so, and I'll hand those out to you here.
While Wes is doing that, let me ask a question, and maybe, I don't know if it's for Tanya. So, we'll have our public hearing on the 31st, then will we move on, assuming we're all happy, to approve the UDO itself at our September meeting? Or is there another advertising deadline that we have to meet in between?
It's really up to the board how you want to approve it and when you want to approve it.
I think at the next meeting, I'm glad you brought it up. Yeah, at the after the workshop, we should be able to do it at the next meeting. There's no time delay from workshop to when you can vote, is there?
Just a normal text amendment process.
Okay.
is what it'd be. So, if you could do it at the September meeting, or you could do it at the 31st.
Okay, so we could take action on it at the 31st. Okay, all right. Thank you for clearing that up. Thank you, Alderman Allen. Anything further, gentlemen? If not, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn our workshop. Mr. Lombardi, second by Mayor Pro Tem. Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor? All right, meeting adjourned. Thank you.